4, 3, 2, and 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another long-anticipated episode of the Art of Move podcast. I've had a few people blowing up my DM saying, hey, when's the next episode coming out? Here you go, guys. It is back. We are still out here in the Canadian Rockies with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar, out here trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement, biomechanics, and how to live and be as a corporeal human being in physical form. That commingling of consciousness and physicality, it's such an interesting experience, and we want to figure it all out. So today we are going to be talking about a few different biomechanical ideas that we've been thinking about and talking about, bouncing back and forth, a couple of debates popping up in Will's DMs that we want to kind of cover. The first thing that I wanted to sort of talk about, and then we're going to kind of bounce off of. So I was having an interesting conversation with Naudi Aguilar recently, and we were talking about the idea of keeping your feet straight or not. And I know in certain systems like GOTA, in One of a Kind Fitness, and in some biomechanics camps, the idea is that you want to keep your feet pointing straight forward. And that's going to be more biomechanically secure. It creates a stable platform for you to articulate your ankle joint in a particular way. It helps you transfer force and energy efficiently because it gives you more options for movement. Naudi made the observation that most athletic African men who excel biomechanically, he's observed with extreme duck footing, and that they seem to have better fascial integrity and that their mechanics just seem to be better. And so the foot straight thing he used to be a major proponent of, but over time he's kind of moved away from it. And so I kind of wanted to discuss why that might be from his observation. I want to kind of talk about both points and see understand where both camps are kind of coming from. So off the top of your head, I kind of know the foot straight argument a little bit better than the foot ducked out argument biomechanically based on the things that we've talked about. But is there anything off the top of your head that you would think of that would make you convinced of any proponents of kind of having your feet turned out?
So I don't know Naudi's logic here, so I can't speak to what he's saying at all. I've kind of heard this argument before. Like, I've heard people say that you can go more duck-footed so you can get more torque, more room to go external to internal, more room for torque, right? I also see more room for error with bone alignment, right? You do observe a lot of people who are fast, especially 100-meter sprinters with duck feet. You also observe straight feet. Okay, so I don't know if you can extrapolate the logic to be like, I observe duck feet on these guys, therefore duck feet is good, right? I don't think you can go with that logic. I'm sure I'm straw manning his argument there. So again, I don't want to talk exactly about what he's speaking, but I do see an argument about possibly being able to create more torque with a duck foot. Now, I don't actually buy that. Okay. I think that most people are duck foot because they're so bound up in the fascial sense.
Right.
And let's talk about the nuances, right? So basically you can duck foot from your ankle joint. It could be collapsed. You could do it at the foot level. Okay. Have a foot just pointed out. So I can, like my wrist is doing this, I can turn my foot out. I can also do it from the knee joint, the tibial torsion itself, without the femoral torsion. So meaning that the tibia, like pretend my forearm here is the tibia and fibula, and my humerus here is the femur. If I just turn, I can turn just my tibia and fibula without turning my humerus, which would be like my femur, right? So you can isolate just one. Maybe one is turned out more, or perhaps it's turned at the level of the hip itself, and both the tibia and femur are turned out. Okay, so all of those things can happen. So I do see the argument where there's more nuance than just keep your foot straight, especially if someone's not working with a coach. It's almost like this is the art of it on the coaching end and on the therapist end, where you have to see why the person's ducking their foot out, or where the torque is actually coming from, where they're tight myofascially. All those things come into play. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, so I wanted to clarify too that when Naudi and I were having this conversation, it wasn't explicitly a conversation about the biomechanical reasoning behind it. It was kind of a passing comment, and it kind of stored it in the back of my mind, thinking this would be an interesting conversation. We should investigate the nuances of this. what he talked about, though, what he did mention afterwards as an afterthought was this idea of just forcing your feet straight. If you have, like you said, if you're bound up fascially and that's turning you into a duck foot, then just forcing your feet straight and trying to change that behavior without addressing some of the biomechanical issues that would cause it can lead to deeper compensations and bigger problems down the line. So a lot of people are saying, well, just get your feet straight. That'll solve the problem. Like you said, if you're not doing it with a coach and you're not addressing some of the systemic things, that's actually a major issue as well. A lot of the fixes would be to release the certain things that are tight and compensating, and then to strengthen the areas that you kind of want to have active on a more regular basis, if that makes sense. And so I like feet straight as kind of a neutral thing. It kind of has like a neutral rotation of the femurs. It has a neutral position from the ankle, and I like having movement and articulation options from the straight foot position. I don't necessarily fall into the camp of if your feet are slightly turned out, it's going to immediately cause a catastrophic injury, like some extremists and some purists. But I do think that having more options to articulate from a neutral position is more beneficial than being too externally rotated or too internally rotated. I think neutral is like, just from an options perspective. That's my own perspective. It just makes more sense to me to have go this way or that way, rather than, okay, well, you're stuck here. You can't turn out anymore, because that's when you kind of get into dangerous range territory. Um, so I like having the options to explore different ranges and different levels of articulation, but I also think that in order to get to that neutral position, it's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation rather than, well, just point your feet straight and over time your feet will straighten out.
Yeah. I mean, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this, right? We can talk about whether we're still or in motion. I think that's different, right? So when you're still, if you can keep your feet straight, or let's say you're slightly ducked when you're still, does that mean that it's going to happen as you move? Not
Mm,
necessarily, right? One way or the other. Um, this almost reminds me of the old debate about how to squat with your feet out, with your feet straight. I mean, that's been an age old debate that's been happening, right? And I remember a movement fix. There's a podcast called The Movement Fix, and he came out with a blog article, maybe like, I'm going to say 8 years ago, showing that the socket of the femur has a different orientation around the world. Some people are shallow, some people are deep, some people have it angled forward, some people have it back, antroversion, retroversion. So this will change the orientation of your foot, where you need to go deep into a squat. Okay. So again, the differences between squatting with weight, of course, everybody wants to do that. Squatting with a barbell is different than gait mechanics. Can we combine the two? I think so. The thing with gait mechanics is I do believe there's a natural pattern. Back to it. Okay. So as the femur goes through, there's an internal rotation. Like when somebody comes off the blocks and they're a sprinter, you'll see the knee pointing in. That's an internal rotation of the femur. It comes out as you land. You're creating that bow shape with your leg. That's absorbing the force. I'm not saying it's you're landing in that bow position. I'm saying you're absorbing force into the bow.
mhm.
Okay. That's external when you get there. Okay. And then back to internal as the foot goes to the behind you, ideally. Now, some people get stuck in one of those areas. Okay. And not necessarily all of the areas. So, for example, what I mean is if you watch somebody walk down the street, right, they can have a straight foot, but as their foot goes behind them, their heel will come in. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's like the heel doesn't flick out, it doesn't stay neutral, it comes in.
Yeah.
Or somebody can have their foot out and still have their heel away at the end. You'll see this with a lot of sprinters, right? So
Mhm.
um, it's not a clean cut debate on what would create more torque. I think the ideal position is straight if you can achieve it without compensation, and we can talk about what would stop you from doing that. Um, but what I do see is you have to go through all those uh, what I just mentioned in the gait cycle in order to have a natural motion. Okay, so it's like a wave.
Mm.
You ever see the starting? Maybe you can pull up like a starting block,
I'm
100-meter
I
sprint, because it really exacerbates what I'm talking about or shows.
Yeah, I'm just pulling that up right now, actually.
Yeah,
I got a pretty good one here.
very
So
nice.
can you see that?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so we got a Safa Powell slow motion sprint. And so you see they're kind of pushing.
Right there. So, can you stop it when Powell has his knee in? Yeah, like right there. That's not even the pinnacle of it. So he comes off the blocks, right? No, it's still internal, but it doesn't show it right there. Yeah. Okay. So see what's happening there? That's the glute on stretch on his left side. Okay. This is I think this is what one of a kind fitness is always talking about
Yeah.
when he's talking about how the glutes actually stretch, right? So there's a difference between concentrically contracting the glute, having the femur go external, contrasting to this where the foot is in the air and going internal. So the glute is on stretch right now, not shortening, but stretching. And I'm not talking about the glute muscle. I like looking at it in a fascial sense. So his fascia's on stretch, and then he comes in, and then he's going to absorb force into that bow. So right there, he's not absorbed yet. See how he's absorbing as it goes through there, right? Then he's going to go back into external rotation. Or sorry, this is internal rotation, but the foot is going away. So heel away, right? Now, did his foot go heel away completely? Maybe he can increase that, maybe not, but it's still going through that cycle that I mentioned earlier, right? So the glute's on stretch and it recoils and he absorbs force into the bow and then he pushes out.
You can really see the spiraling motion of the entire system. And it's funny because I find the initial push on the stretch, it almost looks like they're speed skating on their first couple of steps is something that I noticed. Even when I started doing some dead stop sprints, I would notice that I kind of like almost bounced side to side at first until I found that equilibrium and could kind of drive forward. You see how they really kind of land in this like almost like you see how much lateral motion there is kind of going on.
Notice also, okay, so head over foot. Okay, his head is going over his foot. Whether you want to say that the stability that you're obtaining and that everybody wants is to stop that head over foot, that may be an argument. I don't think it's correct. He's finding a balance point. Okay, I'm not saying he's doing it on purpose, but his body is doing it. Okay, and the femur is actually going in this figure eight motion. Okay, so it's going out to in, into out, out to in. Right, so this is going a little bit away from the duck foot argument because you can see that out here their feet aren't straight.
No, exactly.
Right, but a lot of sprinters will have a straight foot once they get out of the block. Right, so I think that they may be sacrificing a little bit of the straight foot to gain more torque and to also have a faster step. Right, and who's to say that coming out of the blocks is any sort of natural motion? That's a specialty. You know what I mean? Like that is not like something that happens that's made up. 100 meters a made up sprint with track shoes, track, straight line, off the blocks. That's all made up.
Yeah, I mean, look at the like even with the track spikes and everything. Hey, like the shoes super crammed. That's not necessarily a natural human movement. It's definitely an equipment assisted, exaggerated version of a natural movement phenomenon that happens.
Yeah. This is all interesting stuff. So in terms of the duck foot here, the foot turned out, what are you seeing?
Let's take a look here. Well, because like you said, that initial first push off, right? Well, we've had a lot of conversations about whether or not you push off of the big toe, and it seems that every one of these sprinters here that we've watched anyway, there's a lot of big toe push. So, and again, taking a look, it's like, what would be the mechanical advantage of that?
Because you're like to get to the other side of the foot when your body's that low is going to be really, really hard to do. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's just getting the next step no matter what cost. Right. Now, again, this comes back to the argument is like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about longevity? Are we talking about getting from point A to point B in a straight line? Because that's the objective here. Are we talking about athleticism in terms of being faster? Or do you know what I mean? Also, another thing is this video really shows the pressure wave really well. You know, like the spinal bending. It's beautiful. Like, where's the neutral? I don't see the neutral. You know,
Well,
neutral
there's not
fine,
much neutral that
straight,
happens
smooth.
in a starting sprint, right? Like, I almost wanna find hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing, I'm gonna see if I can find um, a different video of a bodybuilder sprinting, and we'll see if we
Take
can
Joel Seedman sprinting.
yeah, that's true, actually, let's see,
You know
Joel
what I
Seed
mean? He'll sprint like a bodybuilder. He'll probably sprint like a CrossFit athlete as well. Anybody who braces their core that much, who has that core tension, is going
Mhm,
to. And some people think that's the ideal.
yeah.
So in terms of a quiet core, Joel Seedman's got it. You want to run like Joel Seedman? Go for it. Like,
Also, you might wanna change your camera settings, I think your Elgato just got, cut out
oh,
there for a sec.
died out, eh? Okay. Let me see here.
But either way, I got Joel Seedman up here. 30-day no warm-up sprint experiment.
Hmm.
Looks a little different than the sprints that we just saw. Like a perfectly stiff line. And there's not much dynamic movement happening contralaterally, ipsilaterally. Prepare to be red pilled. I guarantee this article will challenge everything you've learned in the fit. Okay, so I'm not gonna look at your marketing hype here. We'll just look at your sprint. Compare it to a Powell sprint.
Trying to get my camera back on. Um, yeah, so let's go back to Joel Seedman's sprint here and see what's what.
Actually, I can even change the playback speed to very slow here. So those dynamic forces, that absorption of force, you don't see that as much, hey? It kind of looks like he's like trying to throw his body forward.
It looks like the exact theory of having your core stiff and the legs do all the work. Now his feet are straight. He does exercise. Notice that he exercises with his feet straight quite a bit. I never see him turn out his feet. He's a big proponent, and you'll see it in a sprint here, right? So that also begs the question: are sprinters even told to keep their feet straight?
Well, probably not.
Right. Well, like I don't know, right? Like some probably are, some probably aren't. Probably not, actually, right? Like, um, I think it's just what the average person does. They go into the gym. Sprinting probably has a lot of weight training with it. They probably go with their feet out because that is a more comfortable position for somebody who doesn't have a lot of internal rotation access during a squat, right? But yeah, notice Seedman's running here. It's just absolutely uh, stiff as can be, right?
Mhm.
Perfect brace your core runner.
So this is the brace your core model.
Advanced human performance. This is very advanced. Way past my head here. Look at his face. That's the exact face he makes when he's
When he's
working out
lifting.
as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when he's
So
doing like a big heavy deadlift or something else.
it's very hard to deny the that those neurological patterns go into what you do during the sprint, right?
Yeah.
Your neurological patterns carry over. I feel like there's not enough emphasis on that. People are like, yeah, that happens. And then when you go point it out, they're like, no, that can't be, right? That happens quite a bit.
Just gonna point something out here too.
Sure.
Check out the foot, the lead foot. Right as he starts, it just kind of turns out. Look, right as he's about to start, heel turns in,
Yeah.
and then he starts
Trying to
running.
gain that torque.
Boom. Yeah, so it's almost like the foot naturally wants to turn out, or that torque naturally wants to happen from that start position. Wonder where that comes from. That's interesting. Yeah, so again, like, so this is kind of interesting stuff. Like, you know, we've kind of talked the point of, you know, how you train in the gym translates to your dynamic movement. not necessarily in a positive way. We've talked that to death over 80 something episodes, right? Like we've already established that. That's kind of like, go back and watch the other episodes, guys. We've talked about it enough. I think the question about, like, okay, well, duck feet, is there a biomechanical advantage? Is there a way? One of the things that I thought of actually was, remember when we were watching that video of Kachobe in a previous episode, and we kind of talked about, it's like, look, if you could choose between like having perfectly straight feet and these good patterns, or the fascial integrity of Elliot Kachobe, we'd probably choose the fascial integrity of Elliot Kachobe, right?
Yeah.
Because he has this supported structure that is super resilient. And even though his patterns might not be like technically the most efficient, or his fascial system supports him in a way that those movements are going to be efficient, and he does have the bounce, and he does have the health of his system. So that's kind of an interesting concept to me, where it's like, okay, well, if you're a sprinter and you're running with your feet turned out, and you have the tight shoes keeping you locked in with the spikes, and you have everything going on, and you're not straight footed, but you have a good degree of fascial integrity, you do have a good healthy system, how much does it matter, right? And this is kind of the question that I've kept asking. It's like, I think you should have a tendency and a trend towards efficient patterns and supportive posture, and like, but how much can you get away with if you're otherwise healthy, if you otherwise have a supported structure? That's something that I've been kind of like humming and hawing about a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to this. Again, they're like um, sports performance versus health. Now, keep in mind that you're like, I don't think this is talked about enough, that you have a lot of room within your joint, right? So, like, let's say the hip joint, there's a lot of articulation, there's a lot of neutral movement. The old thought process was keep the joint in the center. That never happens. It's like a sliding, lubricated surface that's like a gyroscope. It literally, I think Goda has that correct. It's most like a gyroscope versus anything, right? So, now you can have your feet out, because let's say your glutes get super tight, or I shouldn't say glutes, I should say the fascia behind your in your glutes, behind your hip, get tight, and then pull your femur towards the outside. Okay. Is that a huge problem right off the get-go? Without, let's say everything else is straight down at the bottom, like the tibia and the femur are aligned and the ankle's nice and high, and you're landing on a good part of your foot, and you have a smooth transition to roll over, whether you want to say it's a second toe, big toe, whatever. It's all smooth. I would say that's not a huge deal. But what would be a huge deal is if everything is not organized. Okay, so if your tibia is internal, or relatively internal compared to your femur, they're not sitting flush, your ankle's collapsed, your foot is a mess, doesn't have quote unquote stability, and a spring, then you're going to be a mess. So it's not like I can look at somebody walking down the street, and both of those examples I just mentioned could have slightly duck footed. One person would have an issue and the other person wouldn't so much, right? I do think like most people, can have straight feet with a little bit of guidance, cueing, a little bit of myofascial release, and a little bit of getting into the hip. So that's why I like a lot of what Goda does, and a lot of, even Weck does it. A lot of people who emphasize basically like having your hips back, OKF, having your hips back and getting into that fascia in the back, whether it's internal, external, they both apply. I do like the internal, like working that internal torque, like you saw off that first run there, where the leg goes in. Okay, that's a good thing to work. So I think OKF really emphasizes that in his training. Okay, but I do it a little bit different. I do it single leg as well. So it's hard to explain, but yeah, you need the space in the back, internal and external. Your femur has to move around within the socket, and that's a balance between the femur moving and the pelvis rotating in its plane, right? So it's not clean and cut. You want the system organized in general. Is what I can say, right? So again, it's a mixture of the balance of forces between lining up the bones, having them spin in the correct order and in the correct sequences, having the fascia not too tight in just one area versus the other area, making sure that each part isn't torqued in the opposite directions, having a neurological behavior repatterned or patterned correctly. Because sometimes you can just mention a cue to somebody and it changes it right away. That doesn't happen to everybody, but sometimes you can just tell somebody to do something and they'll be able to do it without compensation if they have the room to do it. I
Right.
mean, there's so much to this, right?
Yeah, there is, right? I think the issue is like if someone has like a established compensation pattern already and they have fascial adhesions that inhibit the range, right? And it is like I um I'm trying to think of a good example of a situation that I could kind of apply this to. I can kinesthetically feel a lot of like the go to drop in stuff, but my medial glute from and my hip flexors from powerlifting are so overdeveloped and no matter what neurologically take over to a degree that even if I get my glutes on tension and I can actively feel it and actively like I'm still compensating a lot of the time if I don't do a lot of MFR first, and if I don't, uh, like, and this is something that I recently discovered too. I get stripped completely naked and stood in front of a mirror and was kind of doing some things and observing like how my pelvis would shift when I was doing certain rotational movements and what muscles were like cramping up and activating and really looked and kind of went over my movement with a fine-tooth comb and tried to figure out okay what's going on what are the movement pathologies that I've sort of ingrained into myself over a long period of time. So even though I can feel certain things there's still I think this is kind of why Naudi harps on the fact that it's a lot more nuanced and complicated. Why you get so fucking frustrated when you have the evidence-based crowd that are like, "Oh, you're noceboing. It's not that complex. Just fucking lift and do whatever the fuck." And because there are so many factors that go into it, right? When we said it's like, well, it's not just as cut and dry as like, do you put your feet straight or do you not put your feet straight? Everyone has different history and bodies that have been have gone through different traumas and different things and have different predispositions, different lever lengths, different tissue conditioning, different like I even when I power lifted, I knew that because I sat on my bed with my leg up in a deep external rotation to play guitar for 6 hours a day when I was a kid, um like I had a hip shift, when I squatted and I had naturally more externally rotated femur on my right than on my left. And I had better range and better articulation in my left leg because I didn't have this like over time this like shifting and this external rotation of my femur, right? And so it's really like it's nuanced, it's complex. I don't think we should like just be like, well, and here's the thing, like this isn't just in the evidence-based movement optimist crowd. This is also within the biomech crowd that they hyper focus on one element of biomechanics. Like they go all in on like one particular system and they fail to realize the individual experiences of multiple people. They kind of will attach to these ideas as a cure all to everything. Like it'll magically fix everything, but you lose a lot of nuance when you do that. Even if the system itself is rooted in more nuance and more like I find Goda is actually more nuanced when it comes to observing movement than most. But even a lot of Goda coaches don't consider the personal situations of a lot of people. They don't have fascial adhesions or how your abdomen is set, and even the relationship for your rib cage and pelvis is not something that a lot of Goda coaches are considering. But that all affects the fascial length and the fascial tensions that they're trying to create in the first place. So they might do it a lot better. And you might have like, like we talk about a lot of like 80-20, right? Like you can do a lot of the go to patterns and movements as an 80-20, but that 20% is still a pretty significant 20% that if you ignore over time could cause detrimental effects down the line.
Yeah. A couple things. One, I do think that most people can get their foot straight and be successful with that without a lot of compensation.
Mm.
Most people. But the art of it is finding out the people who can't for one or another reason, right? And then second off, it kind of reminds me of the way I kind of came up in this like biomechanics game. It was all self-taught, but it was based on like I'd watch hundreds of YouTube videos of Naughty like for like a year. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Because I have a good anatomical knowledge. You know, I studied anatomy trains even before I saw Naughty. I was like, okay, I get what he's doing here. The sling systems, the torques, and I came to the conclusion. And I'm a chiropractor. I work with a lot of patients, and I see a lot of different ailments, and I can see the lens I'm seeing it through. When I worked within, I shouldn't say I worked within functional patterns. I worked within my own version of sling systems. Nobody would be like, "You'd never figure it out." No, I'm pretty smart. I can figure this stuff out pretty well, right? So it's like I did a lot of the training where I was reciprocating and I was using the recoils of my muscles, or sorry, of my fascia to propel me in different directions. Okay. And I did get a lot of gravy out of it, tons. And I felt amazing as I moved, and I felt a lot more mobile. And I did feel like the rib cage connection to the pelvis got way better. Okay. Like I felt connected there, and I felt like it was almost an elastic, because it is like it's a reciprocation in the circular sense as well. Right. It's almost like a, what's it called? You know, the Chinese finger trap thing?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that, but in a twisting motion as well. So your ribs are almost like the Chinese finger traps when they get tight, and then your pelvis and your ribs go in opposite directions, using the elasticity from each to propel you in the opposite directions, right? Let's say you don't have that connected whatsoever, but you got your feet straight. It's like, so what? Like now you don't, like, I would say the priority there would be to get your ribs and your pelvis connected and working in order and in fluidity. But if you already have that connected, like I did, like I really felt that, and even more so probably than now, because I was doing a lot of mace bell stuff where I would use the elasticity. Um, but I didn't have the straight feet. I was still doing the duck footed squats. I was still doing all the, I was basically running with my ankles collapsed, you know, not to a huge degree, but I did have a pretty big collapse. And the terrain out here is pretty unforgiving. So it's like, I did get a lot of, I guess you can say, minor injuries that I couldn't figure out. But they went away when, and of course this is anecdotal, they went away when I figured out the straight feet, inside ankle bone high, movement of energy wave. So in my experience, and of course I use this on patients too, I have the privilege of also having hundreds of people to test on. Okay. And I don't exactly test. I also, like, I observe what's happening. I know the way the joints move. Okay. So yeah, again, I have privilege of testing with hundreds of people to see what is true and what's not. Okay. Not just guessing, not just guesswork. And I can say that, like, for me and my experience, having straight feet really does help. Okay.
Right.
But does that mean that you can't create more torque going forward in a straight line in a sprint and be quote unquote athletic, getting from point A to point B in a faster time, having duck footed? I don't know. Right. But for longevity and for alignment, I do perpetuate straight foot. But again, the nuance comes back to, there's more to it. Rib cage pelvis alignment, rib cage having volume, energy wave going through your body, being smooth. There's so much to this that, again, what you said, having straight feet is just the beginning, just step one of 100, right? Where somebody can emphasize it and be like, it's everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, you know, what I'm trying to point out as well is that the conversation is nuanced, right? Like it's not just like who's right. Is it Godo or is it functional? Like it's no. That's it's not that. It's that the body is like a very, and here's the thing. We've done over 80 episodes of this right now, and I'll think that I'm starting to figure things out a little bit. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I'm kind of getting it. And then I'll work with another coach, or we'll have a conversation with someone who even suggests another avenue of consideration. And it's like, fuck, I actually have no fucking idea. Like I'm convinced of the direct experiences that I've had of efficient energy transfer. Like even that nice smooth transfer of energy of the over the arch of the foot, some of the patterns that Goda has talked about, working some of those fractal patterns. I've had the experience of my patterns getting more efficient, my body not being in pain. Those are things that I can tangibly say it's like, oh, I've had this direct experience of. In terms of explaining it on a deep level, the more that I learn about the body, the more I just think I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. And like I hate to say it, like and I'm someone who, when I started my personal training journey, it was like, oh, I would read some articles from some successful strength coaches and thought I knew everything. I was like hardcore Dunning-Kruger effect, like to the fucking max. And even now, like we talk about a lot of ideas and people like the ideas that we talk about, and they'll send me messages on Instagram and I'm like, dude, why are you asking me this? I don't know. Like I'm having these conversations because I'm trying to figure it out. I know you probably have a lot better of a mental framework of how to explain and describe a lot of things. You have a better kinesiology, anatomical, like you have a better background in general, where you probably, your mental map is probably a lot clearer than mine is, and also in a better experiential map, because you're one of the things that we've talked about recently that I kind of wanted to dig into is, as we've been doing this podcast and as we've been exploring these different systems, I kind of fell into the trap of focusing on the movements and the biomech and the fixing part, without having a dynamic movement practice to sort of apply some of these movements. And that's kind of why I started getting into boxing more recently. If you're noticing my stories, I got a Bob punching bag, and I got some of those courses from dynamicstriking.com, and I'm trying to learn some stuff, and we got to still meet up and hit the pads and stuff and get some sessions in. But one of the things that I notice is like, oh, the more that I like get into just like trying to get into the nitty gritty of always fixing stuff, the worse my actual dynamic movement is, because I'm not actually moving. And so one of the things that I'm realizing too is like, okay, a lot of like too much theory, too much focusing on trying to fix, trying to like, theorize and like understand the model of like how the human body is supposed to move, and then training it to move in this particular way. I think it's almost like a biomech version of Seedman being this like robo sprinter, except now, I can slowly kind of get into all these like little spiral patterns and stuff. And I have these good patterns in a training setting, but try to get me to cut, or try to get me to like, me throwing a punch is like almost laughable, right? Because like I'm still bound up in my lats. I don't have like a good sharp jab. I don't have that pop in any of my straight arm punches. Like, it's just very, very interesting to see what happens when I try to translate some of this stuff to dynamic movement.
Yeah, some would say that's like a skill. I do agree with you that a lot of people in the biomech world do overemphasize just the biomech. And for those who don't know what biomech is, it's basically just trying to figure out how everything works and kind of isolate the patterns of how it works, but don't actually go out and move. Okay, so and that goes back to like, how do you prove this to yourself? I'm big on that. It's like, can you actually move, or are you just guessing, right? And then a lot of the people will be like, well, that's a skill though.
Hmm.
And the biomech is getting you there to allow you to have the skills. It's like, you don't know that until you actually do it. You're guessing. And the same thing goes with, like, the thing is, it's like, let me see what you've done to prove this, right? And I know that's not the ultimate proof, but some people think the ultimate proof is papers. That's not an ultimate proof. That is relying on trusting a process and authority that the proof is there. Some people rely on a guru, okay? And that's not proof, that's trust, okay? Now, I'm not saying, I'm not completely dismissing it, because, I mean, you got to learn from somebody, but it's not proof of anything. The reality of movement, that's why I like WEC, right? And Naudi. And a lot of the Goda guys. They move really, really well, right? What are you bringing? Like, show me what you're doing. And like, I like doing the same thing, right? Show that you can actually do it. Now, again, that's not ultimate proof, but I sent you the other day like a video of a car on a dynamo. right? And dynamo is like where it's on the spinning, rotating wheel, and you accelerate as hard as you can, and it shows the horsepower of your car. I feel like that's what a lot of the biomech game is. It's like, let me show you the horsepower. I'll run on a treadmill super fast, or I'll jump really high, and that'll prove that my concepts. And it does display something, but it's in a very controlled setting, almost like a lab, almost like a step above a lab. But to me, the whole point is to kind of allow your body to do whatever it wants and go and play, have fun, go do a lot of what you want to do, what actually brings you joy. And then we're stepping on the into the kind of like spiritual side of it, right? With that. But you can get caught up just like you can in the lifting world, where you're just going to the gym just to get stronger, and that's the proof of concept, right? So I would say once you get the biomech down, spend a little bit of time in it, start understanding it, do a little bit of functional patterns, go to WEC, OKF. I like them all. Okay. And spend a little bit of time getting into it, understanding it, and then go do and have fun. That's the main point of it. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would definitely agree. I mean, I think that emphasis on how often do you actually use the fitness that you're working on, the fitness for its own sake paradigm is really, really pervasive, right? Like it's very, very pervasive. Um, I used to be like that, you know, it's like, why do you lift weight? So that I can get stronger to lift heavier weight. And the cycle just goes on forever. And I keep doing that until I get injured. And then I rehab myself from my injury. And so that I can we slowly work back up to slightly past where I was stronger than before, and then I injure myself, and it's kind of like this cycle of up and down and up and down, and it never fucking ends. But like, why did I want to be that strong in the first place? CrossFit was kind of like my answer to that, because it's like, oh, well, now CrossFit is just competitive fitness. So I can literally go to the gym to compete at who is the best at going to the gym, essentially. Uh, Now, that doesn't actually make too much sense if you really break it down. Like, it is actually fun to work on your strength and to display, even strength endurance. Like, CrossFit was really fun to me. There is an element of creativity or not creativity, of competitiveness, of community, of driving yourself to like exceed past your own personal barriers. There was the CrossFit was fun to me until I kept getting injured, right? Until I kept screwing my body up until I couldn't sleep because like I was always jacked up. But I think, I've thought a lot about like, well, what are the things that like really bring me joy? Like on my birthday, you and I went up for this great hike and I felt so good hiking. Like there were times where I was just absolutely gassed because I hadn't done any big hikes that summer at all. But like it was like we were on top of a mountain looking at like the most beautiful landscape in the world. Your dogs were running around. It was great. Like I felt so fulfilled and so nourished by that. And like there were really interesting, challenging things that we had to do with our body. Like I slipped and I had to like catch myself in a deep squat. And I was like, damn, like if I didn't have the strength and the range and like the training background, like I could have really injured myself right there. Right. And so there were moments where my training came out where it's like, oh, like I'm glad that I did some of this stuff because I was prepared. But that was kind of the point, is like we went out on this gorgeous hike and there's something nourishing about it. I don't think that it's funny because exercise as a paradigm of something that you do because it's good for you, or you do because it's like a sort of like a socially appropriate thing to do, like even the fact that there's like a lifting culture, like a gym culture, gym rats and stuff, like where you're self-identified. It's like, I was in that, and then you take a step out of it and you kind of question it, and you're kind of like, retrospectively, this is kind of strange. Like this is a really
Oh yeah.
weird thing. Like, it's a really weird thing to identify yourself with. It's a really weird energy to embody. Because what's the point of it all? Like I think a lot of people don't have something where they feel like they are progressing in their life. They don't feel like they're making positive growth in themselves, in their relationships, in their job, in their career, in whatever is meaningful to them. And so they outsource this sense of meaning to something arbitrary, like how much weight is going on the bar, how lean am I getting, how jacked am I, like how much am I about this life? And they create, and because again, a lot of human satisfaction comes from a sense of community. So you're not only creating a situation where there's a tangible thing that feels like it's progressive, which is, which is good for your mind, good for your mental health, but then you also have a community of other people that are like, yeah, like let's all get jacked. We're all gym rats, like the gym selfies, the protein shakes. Well, we have like gym memes with each other. You have a sense of camaraderie that is also, really fulfilling. So from a perspective of like human mental health and happiness, I see the appeal.
Absolutely.
I was deep in it. But you actually look at the reality of what you're doing and what you're investing your time in. Like, is there an end, like is there an end game there? Is there something that makes you happier beyond those things, like the community sense and the arbitrary increase of weight? What's the point?
Yeah, it becomes its own kind of like treadmill,
Yeah.
there's a culture behind it and there's a community behind it. And I'm very kind of libertarian in my approach there. I don't want to like, if somebody loves lifting, go and lift, right? Like I'll tell you
Yeah.
how to lift the best possible. I'm going to give you advice and on what happened in my world and why it's a good idea to branch out. But if you want to lift, please lift, right? Like if it makes you feel good, a lot of people go and they're at that point. Like maybe somebody their whole life has looked at themselves as skinny. They were, I'm just giving an example, made fun of for being thin or opposite for being thicker, right? And they're going to the gym and finding success there and gaining a whole bunch of confidence. Please go do that, right? And community and fun and all that. But there is the higher end of it where you're going to the gym just to go to the gym to get big so you can do the same lift that you did last week in the gym. So it becomes like this whole thing where you're tied to a gym. Like you really saw this during COVID where a lot of people didn't know what to do when
Mm.
when the gyms closed down. There was a panic with a lot of people. And I even heard like one of the movement optimism physios is like the gym closed down, so I didn't have time to go to the gym. And then he went back to the gym and injured his back. Adam Meekins, right?
Mm.
Doing deadlifts, and one of his excuses on the podcast, I can pull it up at some point. It was, well, I didn't have the gym for this amount of time, so then I wasn't prepped, right? So
Mm.
if you need a gym in order to prep for life, maybe there's an issue there. Maybe there's a better way to do it. If you're doing it for community sense and for mental well-being and just having fun, go for it. But note that there's a difference between being able to lift something heavy in the gym and obtaining numbers in the gym to extrapolating that into real life longevity, athleticism, and movement. Those are not the same things, right? A lot of times the truth is you'll be lifting for the sake of lifting. Who knew that if you're lifting a barbell, which was invented 100 years ago, and you're getting better at putting more weight on the barbell, that you're just getting better at putting more weight on the barbell. But there's a whole culture around, no, it's not true. Actually, if you put more weights on this barbell, you'll be able to be more athletic, more explosive, faster, can cut better, can longevity. Your bones will be more hard for life. You'll have more
Mm.
testosterone. Eat this protein. Get this six pack. Like it's very much like that. And then the CrossFit end of it is interesting because I did the same thing as you, right? Like it's like, oh man, I'm good at lifting. I got good numbers in lifting, and I'm good at gymnastics. Now I can compete at the gym, right? So it's almost like a sport onto itself, and it's branded as the fittest on the planet,
Mm.
which begs the question, what is fitness, right? But if I'm the fittest on the planet, I'm going to be able to do multiple domains of exercise and put it all into one, and that is fitness. But have you noticed CrossFit people being really, really athletic outside of CrossFit? Like, do you see professional athletes training in CrossFit? Not a
Well, I
lot.
mean, like some do. Like there's some like football players, but like I don't think you're gonna get like an NFL training camp that's centered around CrossFit necessarily, right? You're not gonna see it. I know that what's Rich Froning, trained was like one of the trainers for different football teams, right? And so he would train these football teams in a CrossFit oriented approach. How effective that was is another question, right? So I personally don't think that, like, are you gonna get like Matt Frazier to fucking, pull up on LeBron and like, stand up on the basketball court or do whatever. It's like, okay, well, is that a skill thing? Like, could he learn it in theory? Could he be good at these different sports? Like, maybe, maybe it's sports are skill specific for sure. I guess the question is too, is like, what is athleticism? Like, how do you define athleticism? Is it the ability to cut? Is it the ability to produce force and speed? Is it the ability to jump? Is it the ability to have to successfully complete multiple tasks that are, varied in their application and difficulty? Like, can a person be athletic in a sport like boxing, but not athletic in a sport like basketball, or not athletic in a sport like swimming? You know, athleticism for me, in my mind right now, how I visualize it, how my mental model of it is specific tasks oriented towards athletic endeavors. And athletic endeavors are specific to the sport that you're trying to win at. So that's kind of where my head's at with that. It's an interesting question for sure. It's definitely an interesting question. Um, but the just to rewind back to this idea of like doing things for their own sake, right? Like, I think I'm very much within your camp of like, do whatever it is that makes you happy ultimately. Um, James Earl talked about this too, where it's like, do whatever you want. Just realize that, unless you're specifically the thing that you love is trying to find the most biomechanically efficient version of yourself, and you're training specifically to have optimal function and longevity and whatever, that there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost of whatever it is that you do, whether you play basketball, whether you golf, whether you swim, whether you do whatever. There's going to be some sort of cost and some sort of mechanical repercussion of you repetitively doing anything over and over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple nuances to kind of like what I said before that pertains to what you just said. Now, you can take elements of CrossFit and you can make them into a sport training program, right? Because there's a lot of singular elements that the good part about CrossFit is they're very emphasized on form, right? And how to do things the best way possible in order to achieve a goal, right? And a lot of times that sport has the same goal, right? So let's say a Matt Frazier can teach somebody Olympic lifting. Olympic lifting is supposed to make you more explosive. Therefore, Matt Frazier would be a good coach for a athlete, right? So I don't believe that actually, but that would be the narrative for somebody who believes Olympic lifting transfers over to sport, which I think there's not that much transfer, right? Unless it's a bilateral focused lifting sport, right? So there's a lot of nuance to that. Another thing is on the kind of the spiritual side, or the more like more spiritual side of things, you can do a similar task in a different way. So for instance, MMA fighting or MMA or boxing, right? I do the footwork, I do the actual movements without fighting people that much, and it brings me a lot of joy. So it's like an internal martial art. Now, can I also apply it on the outside? Yes, but I don't feel like I need to in my life. I do it for a joy practice. Now, take somebody who can kick my ass, Chuck Liddell. Okay, Chuck Liddell could probably one punch me, right? KO, but he was in a camp called pit fighting, okay, the pit fighters, where they would beat the shit out of each other, right? And now I don't think he can get out of that mode. Mike Tyson admitted to this too, that I don't think they practice things just lightly to get flow, like a dance, to get into flow. Now I'm gonna pull up a picture of Chuck Liddell here, and you tell me what you see here, or I'll tell you what I see, and we can both talk about it here. Sorry,
I'll just elaborate on what you're saying.
Sure.
Like, you want to talk about like the different levels of energy of a martial arts application. Like, I think of a really low level consciousness expression of it would be drunk guys fighting outside of a bar. Like they're beating the crap out of each other, and there's a lot of arm swinging, and the intent is violence. The intent is aggression. The intent is anger. Oh my gosh! So that's Chuck Liddell. Is this like 2022 Chuck Liddell right now?
Yeah. So 2022 Chuck Liddell, like, does he appear healthy and in this photo. Like he looks to me like very stuck in his energy, and he's applying the same type of energy to lifting as he did to martial art because he needs to compete at something. Now I'm psychologically analyzing him and I may be way off, but I don't think so here, right? So basically he could go into fighting and or sorry, like boxing or martial arts and do it in an internal sort of sense where he's doing it to relax. But was he able to do that while he was champion? Probably not. So he's bringing that into lifting now, and I don't think it's going to end well, right? So Mike Tyson talked about this too. I'm not just saying things. Mike Tyson talked about not being able to let that go. It was when he was boxing, he was the killer. He was the angry guy who went at you and can punch through you, right? Can you also box relaxed, breathing, thinking of great things, expressing yourself? Like it's more of a dance. I always say boxing and dance are a spectrum. MMA and dance are a spectrum. I feel like Israel Adesanya really embodies this, right? Where you can bring both together and you can internally increase your energy. But if you do it to fight, to like only to kill and only to get that anger out or to have that energy of go, 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 right? Then it could be detrimental. Now, I sent you another video I'm going to pull up here. Am I still sharing my screen? Can you see? Oh, okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you saw it or not, but it was a arm wrestler. It was a power lifter versus a just a smaller arm wrestler guy. Watch their energy, just energy wise, what you see in this from the power lifter doing this. Okay, yeah, you're pulling it up. Do you have volume on that?
I do. Can you hear that?
Okay. So this, I'm going to guarantee this guy brings that type of energy into whatever he does. Now, to me, this is going to lead to a health issue in the spiritual sense, manifesting in the physical sense eventually. Okay. Having that sort of like, you could bring this to CrossFit and he would probably be a good CrossFit athlete. You could bring it to martial arts and he would probably be a good martial artist eventually. You know what I mean? But does that translate into health? Right? Like the numbers, the winning, that type of
the rage, almost
the rage,
the intensity. He's like, see how red his fucking face is? They're redder than his shoes are.
Now you could be like
screaming every time. The other dude is just like calm, cool, and collected. Like obviously the effort and intensity is there, but he's present. He's relaxed. He's bringing intensity without aggression.
Now you could be like, Will, you're straw manning. Not every power lifter is like that. No. Quite a few are. Like it makes you very successful in the sport, right? And there's a culture around that. Okay, there's a culture around. Yeah, I'm bigger than you. So what? I can lift more than you. Shut up, right? I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you, and that translates into how you live your life as well, right? So I'm not saying it's completely negative. There's a small amount of that you can take around, but that's a very easy way to go way too far into one direction, right? So do you think that guy right there would handle a situation if he was angered in a high level way, in a high energy way?
So what you're asking is if there was a life stressor that called upon him that frustrated him or that like challenged him in a particular way, how well would he be able to handle that? Well, he would handle it in the same way that he handles other things, with intensity and rage and anger and aggression. Maybe not, because sometimes people do compartmentalize, right? There's this thing where it's like, oh, I let my demons out in the gym and then I'm a more calm, even keeled person. Like I know a few friends who like that's really their thing. It's like it's almost like a physical outlet for energy that they don't have the space or capacity to outlet in other things. But you see, like maybe not that guy specifically, the red in the face, the screaming at everything, screaming at with like, battle cries towards the challenges that he's faced with in his life. Maybe he battle cries at every challenge that he has in his life. Maybe he goes headlong into it. So I think there is, there's healthy and unhealthy expressions of it, right? Even people who physically express their mixed martial arts or their martial art, for example, there are respectful ways to do it. There are ways to spar with people where you're doing it in a mind expanding way. Like if you and I were to spar, we wouldn't be trying to knock each other out. We wouldn't be trying to pop each other's livers with with a good left hook. We'd be trying to like figure out, okay, now that we're in this dynamic expression, how can we really like play off each other's energy and move better and like start to apply what we have been practicing in a deeper way. We wouldn't be trying to knock the shit out of each other.
No,
you
well,
know of
I mean, some people would say there's time and place for that, and there is, right? Like, you
course.
kind of just articulated my point in a much better way than I did, right? Like, that, like a guy like Israel Adesanya, I guarantee he spars hard,
Mm,
but he's applying his energy there. He's calm and cool, collected outside the ring most of the time, right? And that goes with a lot of martial artists are like that now, right? But
mm,
you'll see every once in a while the rage guy who comes in who just like that's his thing to how he goes through life. Actually, you used to see this a lot in mixed martial arts because it was more of an angry guy sport at the start. Now it's
mm.
like athletes who are calm, cool, and collected, right? So it's a different game. And I know that you have to bring somewhat that energy in there. It's to be able to control it. And that was kind of my point. That was showing the Chuck Liddell,
Mm,
talking about Mike Tyson talking about this, showing the power lifter there who can't control where they put their energy or where they bring their energy. And that was the whole point of like saying the internal martial art, right? Like the being able to turn it on, turn it off, flowing your energy, allowing energy to cycle through you, even if you're angry. You put it in the right direction and not just uh, in the rage. You know what I mean? In every compartment of your life.
mm.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of like I think one of the hardest things to do is that, let's say you're angry, channel that energy into creativity or into making your life better, right? Because everybody experiences those emotions. So it's just interesting. Are you able to do it? I don't think Chuck Liddell is able to do it. I think he's carrying it over to other aspects of his life. Mike Tyson talked about it, and I think that you saw it there with the powerlifter um, arm wrestling.
Right. So like I think at the end of the day, everyone experiences these energies. I know I do. Like I went like one of the reasons I bought the Bob was actually so that I could have a healthy way to express frustration where in my other areas of my life it's just inappropriate to express frustration and anger. But with this physical outlet, you can get focused and you can be deliberate and you can outlet this energy in a healthy controlled way. And that doesn't mean that I'm swinging haymakers until I'm gassed, because I'm angry and I don't know how to deal with my anger. It just means that like, okay, there's things that in life that are going to be frustrating. And as much as I can try to channel it into making things better, there's things that are outside of my control that are frustrating. And you sometimes need to have a healthy expression and outlet for challenging emotions and being able to have, like you said, a present, like boxing is something that I'm not good at. And so I have to be very present when I'm learning it and when I'm like I'm breaking things down. And by the end, it's like I almost became so mentally focused on my technique that the anger just disappeared, right? Like it's not me like aggressively beating the shit out of a punching bag because I need to. It's like, okay, I need to outlet this energy somehow, and I'm going to do it in a way that makes me present, that's physically involved, it's moving the energy physically. And that's sort of my own exploration of that in particular. But I find transmutation of emotional energy is a skill that a lot of people don't have. They don't know how to do it. We're not taught about it. It's something that is a little intangible and individual. And I think we need to have deeper layers of this conversation. And maybe that can be the next topic of our next episode here, guys. So this is we're approaching episode 90 pretty quick here. We're gonna get up to maybe even, we'll see, maybe not 100 by the end of the year. We'll see. Stranger things have happened. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
just bang it out and we'll try to get to 100 by the end of 2022 here. But either way, thank you for listening, guys. This is another episode of the Art of Move podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can follow me at Anthony.Manuel, Manuele on Instagram. Will is at The Art of Move. Shoot us a message if you want us to talk about a certain topic, if you have a debate that you want us to get into, if you heard an idea that you're not sure about that you want us to cover. I would love to hear what you would love to see. If you have recommendations for guests, just shoot us a message and we'd be happy to explore it. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Art of Move, guys. Thank you so much for listening.
Have a good one, guys.